Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium's second in a series of webinars on the Prescriptive 90-day action plan tool for supply chain risk and resiliency. This is a prescriptive online tool that just takes 25 or 30 minutes to complete the survey. We appreciate you coming in today, and especially with the high pressure environment that we're all in, with growing inflation and lockdowns still happening sometimes in the world, but everybody being pressured and not enough people to do all the jobs out there. Most importantly, we hope that your family is healthy and safe. Again, this is the second webinar in our series, and on the 90-day action plan, focused on supply chain risk and resiliency. We look forward to an interactive webinar consisting of this audience polling questions, which is the polling question here is around what risk events have you had since the pandemic. My name is Jim DeVries, founder, president of Enhance International. I will be the host of today's webinar. We have Connor Fitcham, who also will be helping us behind the scenes. Thank you, Connor. Joining us is Greg Schlegel, and he'll be sharing his vast expertise. Greg is the original founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium and former president of Apex, now ASCM. Greg, a few words.
You bet. Thanks a lot, Jim. Great to be with you today to talk about our passion. We'll talk about Supply Chain Risk Consortium in a minute, but I've taught supply chain risk management at Lehigh University here in the States for 10 years. I still teach ERM, Enterprise Risk Management, at Villanova University, again here in the States. And I spent 8 years with IBM as a supply chain executive consultant. I spent 30 years, perhaps like many of you, as a supply chain practitioner and executive for a couple of Fortune 100 companies. So great to be here with you, Jim.
Yeah, and just a little bit of background on myself. I've served as a resilient executive leader for Fortune 500 companies, all the way down to startups. For the past 30 years, I've overseen the global identification, prioritization, and execution of high-value business improvements, self-generating and self-funding results. I've been an OpEx leader. I've led sales teams, led supply chain teams in companies like Air Products, GE, Tyco, C.H. Robinson. Through the years, our teams have developed resilient enterprise ecosystems to serve the company and drive out the competition. So with that, Greg, let's see if we get to respond here. This is the second webinar of the series. Where are you? Our next webinar will be on the risk appetite, and then we'll get into operational propensity, and then the 90-day action game plan, and then how to make supply chain risk and resiliency a priority in your company. With that, Greg.
You bet. You bet. Well, our theme today is supply chain risk and resiliency maturity model. We're going to focus on that. Just to give you a quick thumbnail sketch of the consortium, and then we have one other slide. We went on demand. The entire consortium is virtual. We did that 2 years ago. As you can see, we got a little push button there. We do education, supply chain readiness. We're going to talk about the SCR&R action plan today. We provide platforms to do heavy lifting, and we do journey consulting. So we'll give you another little thumbnail sketch on the next slide, just to give you who we are and what we do. All right, so we can go to that slide. You can see on the right, We have 31 companies, I think, at the moment. That's about 1,500 supply chain risk professionals around the globe. Essentially, these folks bring tools, techniques, methodologies, and heavy lifting solutions on the right to help us do one thing: identify, assess, mitigate, and manage supply chain risks. On the left-hand side, again, we provide products and services in 5 areas. We mentioned we have 2 certificate courses that are been running for about 2 years, 3 years. One is a basic and another one is dedicated to public health care. We do coaching and consulting. We bring solutions to bear. We have 2 online assessment tools. One is called the Readiness Assessment Tool. We'll talk about that in another series. Today, we're going to talk about the bottom bullet, and that is Prescriptive Online Supply Chain Risk and Resiliency, the 90-day action plan, and focus today on our maturity model. Jim, back to you.
Thanks, Greg. And our agenda today. So our agenda today is a 5-part agenda. First, we'll start out with the VUCA world, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Then we'll get into the impetus for the on-demand 90-day supply chain risk and resiliency assessment action plan. Then we'll talk about the maturity model, taking a deep dive into exactly what the maturity model is. And then we'll tap your experiences, our experiences in developing tailored action plans. We have some use cases that are very interesting to share with you. And then the benefits, okay? And that's really getting into how do you sell supply chain risk and resiliency into your company. With that, we'll get into today's VUCA world. Greg?
Yep, you bet. Yeah, we'll go to the next slide and give you a couple of terms and definitions of VUCA. What is the VUCA landscape? Kind of looks like this. The V is for volatility, as Jim mentioned, all right? And essentially, that describes something that is liable to vary or change, sometimes very quickly, and often for the worse. What is that? That is the government lockdowns that we have been wrestling with for 2.5 years, all of us around the globe. The U is for uncertainty. This is a state of not knowing or being able to rely on something. What is that? In our world, it's the demand and supply shocks due to the lockdown. All right. They've been happening simultaneously, and that's the first time ever in 45 years that demand and supply shocks have happened simultaneously. C is for complexity. This can be defined as something with many parts in an intricate arrangement. What is that? That, folks, is our supply chains, especially global supply chains. So with that comes A for ambiguity. Something is ambiguous if it is open to more than one interpretation, and that, folks, is essentially taking all of the volatility, uncertainty, and complexity, and that's what we've been living with in terms of the VUCA landscape for the last 2.5 years. Let's take a look. So how to mitigate the VUCA world, all right? Our first blush reaction to you is build a resilient enterprise. And so we wanted to share this coming from our book. This was the best definition of a resilient enterprise that we have seen over the last 10 years. A resilient enterprise has the capacity to overcome disruptions and continually transform itself to meet the changing needs and expectations of who? Your customers, your shareholders, and other stakeholders. Now, we'll be honest with you, that is a pretty tall order. And that means any disruption, not just one or two, any type of disruption. So we wanted to share that with you. It is a tall order. We have some additional insight for you. This is a recent LinkedIn survey profile from Gartner. Gartner, if you're not aware of them, they are pretty much the premier supply chain research organization here in the United States and abroad. They put out a quick question: which of the following has caused unprecedented challenges for supply chains in 2022? This came out just recently, and you can see on the right, not surprising, the ongoing pandemic, about 30% of us, and then boom, not surprising as well, global shortages, which means I don't have enough inventory and or I have excessive inventory, and net I have an imbalance. So we're not surprised, but we wanted to share that with you because that is still the approach towards the VUCA world. All right. Okay, next.
So what is the bullwhip effect? So the bullwhip effect is defined as the uncertainty caused from distorted information flowing up and down the supply chain. And as Greg said, in a VUCA world, that's what we have on both sides. So on the demand side, looking at the top left here, we see that, the wavy line is, coming from the customer. So that's where it starts. A small change in amplitude in that demand will manifest itself into quite a large effect on the up to the supplier side. So that large disruption is what we're seeing in the shortages and overages that we just talked about. Then on the supply side, on the upper right here, we have, the factory out there, causing distortions of relevant materials, and then distortions from relevant information starting off, and then causing the distortions of relevant materials moving up and down the supply chain. So here you have, on the demand side, customer demand changing, and sometimes you want it, sometimes you don't. And then on the supply side, the availability of that component, that raw material, changing over time. So what does that all breed? Well, that breeds this overall W recovery challenge here. So where both demand and supply disruptions are occurring at the same time. And this is what we put together, Greg and I, over 2 years ago. And this is what's happening today. And that's why we call it the W recovery. We're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have too much supply. You're going to have not enough supply. And it's going to vary for quite a while here until it settles out, which is therefore the bullwhip and the crack of the bullwhip. So we believe we're right in, many businesses may be in the crack of the bullwhip right now. So in summary, whoever can manage these surges the best, right, are the ones who are going to gain an unfair market share. So whether you're a retailer, wholesaler, distributor, or manufacturer, managing this proactively is your best way. How do you do it proactively? Well, that's what risk management is all about. And so what we want to share next is what CEOs have been talking about lately. And this chart here is from Internet of Things Analytics. And this is what CEOs talked about in Q3 of 2022 and Q2 of this year. And on the y-axis, you have keyword growth. So this is internet keyword growth. And on the low side, you have low and fading importance. On the upside, you have growing importance. So what are those topics that are growing in importance and ones that are fading on the y-axis? And then on the x-axis is the keyword importance. So from 0 to 100% on a log scale. So everything in the upper right-hand quadrant is what's new and upcoming. So you see economic slowdown, recession, hiring. Those are the hot topics of today that you see in the news. Underneath that, you see the topics of yesteryear or yesterquarter, as we might say today, is AI, supply chain uncertainty. And then even further down are the things that we were maybe talking about a while back, but still very important, is COVID and the invasion of Ukraine. So we went from the invasion of Ukraine at the top of the year, and that's slowly fading off. And economic slowdown and inflation is now the hot topic. We have our old topics of Industry 4.0 on the left side quadrant here, and AV, AR, and audio and virtual reality, augmented reality, and virtual reality here, and then your hybrid work. But the main thing is you see here is the big push now is in the economic slowdown that we're occurring, which again, when we talk about lockdowns, now we have an artificial lockdown, and that's the Fed raising interest rates. So everybody's worried what is going to be the impact of that artificial stimuli. So again, how do you deal with this? Well, you got to focus on your enterprise-wide supply chain maturity. Why? Because what you don't know about your supply chain can and will hurt you. So that's really how we're tying it in. If you don't understand how well your supply chain's running relative to your a maturity model and how well you're positioned in the marketplace, you're going to get you're going to lose your competitive edge in the market, because whoever owns the maturity will end up surviving and thriving in this time. With that, we'll move to the survey, and in it we ask you to enter in what risk events have you experienced since COVID-19. So we ask you to enter things in here, what you find: border closures, Ukraine, I see, lead times. Enter in a phrase. If you see a phrase there that you like, enter it again, because if you enter it again, then it will come out to be more prevalent. Greg, your thoughts?
Not surprising. I wish there were fewer of these folks, but our clients have been talking about these elements and others for the last 2.5 years. As Jim mentioned, some of the industries are getting a little bit more balance between supply and demand, especially in the ocean carrier arena now. That game's over, you know, with ridiculous pricing. The pricing is coming down for ocean freight and other types of freight as well. So that dilemma is subsiding a bit. There's logistics still. We said early on in March and April of 2020, what you will do when you have these types of disruptions is you will pay premium for inventory and for logistics. We knew it was coming. Just human nature. That's how it works. It's getting a little better, but now we're wrestling with inventory excess overages and stockouts. So it's not done yet. So thanks a lot for your participation here.
Yeah, and please keep entering it in. Maybe we'll circle back at the end of the webinar. This polling was open throughout, so enter in what you feel the most important. If you really feel strong about one of these, enter it in twice. All right. So what we did was we decided to go back in 2021 and say, okay, what happened in 2021 when we asked folks for this the same survey question. So a year later, it's interesting to see, you know, we were talking then about uncertainty, canceling, delays, a lot of the same types of things, bullwhip. What do we got? Disturbances. A lot of the same.
Well, the big one was staff issues, yeah. Jim.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
that was big. Skilled labor is in there. At the moment, it's changed complexion a little bit. That's why we wanted to give you a sense of comparison.
Absolutely. So pretty interesting when you compare the two. I think we're getting more. Before, I think it was uncertainty. We didn't know what was going to coming next. Now we think we know what's coming next, and we're trying to deal with it. So the question is, do we really know what's coming next? All right. With that, we're going to just cover a section here on the evidence for the 90-day action plan. Why did we come up with this? And just a few notes there. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic kind of took us out of the classroom and into the virtual world. And then there was just recently, the Gartner LinkedIn survey that Greg talked about the challenges for 2022, but even back then, there was McKinsey wrote within their report on November 16th, 2020, why investing in supply chain resiliency pays off. If you remember in 2022, or in 2020, I should say, supply chain and supply chain resiliency was not even a term that people had heard. It was still brand new. Now it's everybody is talking about it. You watch the 6 o'clock news, so to speak, it's on primetime TV, even on your local station. Everybody's talking about supply chain and supply chain risks. The inability to sit with companies, as we mentioned, to lead, guide, direct, and coach within the company hallways was certainly a reason for the tool. Again, this is an online tool with 30 minutes of your time, of a cross-section of your organization, and boom, you have where you're at on maturity, what your risk appetite is, and where you sit on operational propensity, your culture, your company. And then the fourth is the staggering and uneven negative impact of the pandemic manufacturers due to artificial demand and supply shocks. So yes, the lockdown started it, but of course, COVID started it all over from the beginning, and then how we reacted to that and continue to react to it by insourcing. And now we see a whole new structuring of the supply chains. And so we're going to continue to have demand and supply chain shocks. China is now turning inward since the pandemic and trying to build a self-sufficient economy while the rest of the world is trying to deal with that. Russia is attacking Ukraine. All these things are causing a lot of demand and supply shocks across the supply chain. So it's not going to end anytime soon because we keep on having these things igniting and the bullwhip effect. So these inputs will continue to drive us. So what is the supply chain risk and resiliency journey roadmap? So we'll just walk through this real quickly. It's a 90-day action plan, maybe even a 6 months action plan. It's done all online, all virtual. It's a 7 hours of investment at a time over 3 months. Those 7 hours are mostly interaction, coaching, meetings with onboarding, collaboration, and coaching sessions with you and your executive teams. But what it covers is 3 different major perspectives. Where are you? The maturity model, which we'll cover today. Who are you? What's your risk appetite? There's no right or wrong. And how do you operate? Your maturity, your operational propensity, we like to say. And then the output is your 90-day action plan with 5 to 8 actions that are tailored for your company. And so how does this get all started? It starts with its onboarding call, which takes about an hour for your lead person. Then you bring up your executives, 5 to 8 stakeholders, generally from sales, supply chain, manufacturing, finance, and alike. And then you get into the 90-day action plan report, which will generate from those survey results, and out will come the 5 to 8 actions. And then we'll have checkpoint calls throughout from the report. You'll get a first call, second and third call, and a fourth call. And then there's another 20 hours of consulting that are available to help you and support you in implementing your 90-day action plan. So with that, Greg?
You bet. We said we would do a deeper dive. We're going to focus on the maturity model, one of 3 computer-generated models coming out of the online survey using what we would call AI and ML algorithms. So we've put all of our 12 years of experience into the online virtual model, and we would like to talk a little bit about it, give you a better sense of what the model looks like. So we'll, excuse me, we'll start here. This is the model real quick, because then we're going to do a deeper dive. On the left-hand side, the y-axis, that's your supply chain risk and resiliency maturity, from zero, from low to high. On the x-axis is time, and normally it's competitive advantage from 0 to infinity. And as you can see, there's 5 stages. We'll give you detailed definitions of each 5. I'll just go through and say there's foundation, then visibility, then predictability, then resiliency, and then sustainability. And I know you're thinking already, well, how long is each segment? We'll be honest with you, it's about 18 months from what we've seen in our 12 years. This model is in our book. It is the baseline of our book, and essentially what we've seen by observation. And there are hundreds of mature supply chain risk and resiliency companies out there. It's about 18 months for each stage. Up on the top, you'll see us and hear us talk about our mantra, and that is identify, assess, mitigate, and manage supply chain risks. On the bottom, we like to superimpose heat maps on the maturity model, so it's kind of color coded. If you're at foundational and you don't have good supply chain visibility, we would basically say we think your supply chain is at risk. As you move up the maturity model and curve, yes, we think you can minimize and reduce your inherent risk. And even at sustainability, you will not hear us say you can eliminate risk, but you could certainly minimize and mitigate the risk as you move up the supply chain maturity model. And then we always ask the final question, where are you? And so that's what we're going to talk about for the next 30 minutes. We'll do a deep dive into each one of the segments and then follow up with a couple of closing remarks. So with that, we'll start at the foundation. You can see foundation section on the top right. What does it do? Well, you got to start somewhere, folks. Remember, think of the y-axis and the x-axis. All right. If you have low supply chain resiliency and your maturity is very new, you haven't really talked too much about it, you're at what we would say is a foundational phase. What does that mean? Well, first of all, you need to become aware of risk management. Do you talk about it? We normally advocate education here and awareness. We do about 25 workshops a year around the globe, face to face. Jim and I do 2-3 webinars each month since April of 2020. So essentially, you have to become aware that there are, excuse me, best practices out there for risk management. And essentially, we always advocate in this stage, education, maybe a supply chain risk and resiliency basic course, online, self-paced. You receive a certificate from the consortium. It provides you tools, techniques, methodologies, and best practices and solutions to help yourself move from foundation to the visibility. And it does produce, in our point of view, a universal language so that all of your disciplines that Jim talked about, all those disciplines are using the same terms and definitions. So we advocate awareness and education first. That is essentially the elements of the foundational stage. Next stage. Next stage is visibility. All right. What do we think about in terms of the complexion of the visibility stage? Well, what we advocate is, again, creating an awareness of risk across your supply chain. All right. Meaning, we're talking about producing real-time profiles of your materials, your assets, all the elements within your supply chain. As we talked about it, visibility. Most of us do not have good supply chain visibility. What do we mean by that? Visibility upstream to your suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, tier N, and also downstream to your customers. Many of us forget that customers can experience the same types of risk events that suppliers experience, and customer experiences can be as impactful as your suppliers. So we want you to remember that. All right. What else are we talking about in visibility? We're talking about transparency across the supply chain. Again, upstream to your suppliers, downstream to your customers. Many of us do not have good supply chain visibility. And then what else does it do? If you do that and embark on that second stage, you're going to enable your stakeholders to respond quicker than your competitors to unexpected risk events. And that to us is a competitive advantage. So the net is on the bottom below the heat map is, remember, what you don't know about your supply chain can and will hurt you. All right. We have more. Third stage, predictability stage. Might not be exactly what you're thinking. We're not talking about predicting the next hurricane or the next earthquake. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about scenario planning. We're talking about digitizing your supply chain. I'm going to sneeze. Hold on.
Yeah, but
I'm allergic to my own home office. That's not a good thing. All right. Little levity there, little levity. All right. We're talking about digitizing your supply chain. All right. Start small, think about a product line and digitize those nodes in your supply chain. Why? So that you can do what if scenario planning. All right. What if I lose a supplier? What if I lose a customer? And you can run some models, what if scenarios, to see one, your P&L, your profit and loss impact if that happens, and two, we advocate that you append a risk to every one of those scenarios. That's what exemplar companies do on a regular basis. So they're becoming proactive when they talk about risk events, and they align their mitigation plans to that potential risk. Granted, you build a mitigation plan, and essentially that risk may not come to fruition, but if it does, you have a plan to mitigate that, and you go exercise that. A couple other things: it provides insight, to all of your disciplines, because they don't normally think this way, all right, in terms of cause and effect. And again, we talk about war rooms. Many of our clients and our exemplar companies that we're aware of have supply chain risk war rooms. They've done that. They digitize their supply chain, and then they monitor it 24/7, 365. Again, they leverage digital twins. That's what we advocate. You can do that. Trust me, if someone ever tells you your supply chain is so complex that you can't model it, please run very fast. All right. That is not true. All right. Every supply chain can be digitized. And so the net is we like to think of it as this stage, proactively running scenarios and developing risk mitigation methodologies. And so essentially, to be able to see how your supply chain reacts to certain risk stimuli before it occurs. And with that, I'll move it over to Jim.
thanks, Greg. And we move on to the fourth stage, resiliency, on establishing your resilient enterprise. So here, risk management leaders are embedding new risk tools, techniques, methodologies, and key risk indicators such as time to recovery, value at risk, resiliency indexes into their daily supply chain making processes. Why resiliency? These frameworks, protocols, metrics, and organizational structures provide a foundation for operational excellence in risk management and a resilient enterprise. Then we talk about establishing daily supply chain decision-making processes and embedding deep learning and computer vision alerts and network scenarios planning into your day-to-day life. So again, when we talked about predictability with Greg, we talked about digital twins. Now those digital twins are creating this learning center so that you can start building resiliency and proactively driving network risk scenario planning. Now we're, as Greg likes to say, we're getting jiggy. And then, of course, then you got that user interface, user experience, interactive war room with visibility and real-time risk action planning for all the stakeholders. So now you're proactively going out to stakeholders and telling them in this event what you're going to do, and it's not out of the routine of what you're doing. So it's embedding it in your day-to-day. And these frameworks come out with protocols, metrics, and organizational structures. And what we mean here is people know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it in a timely manner. We're not waiting for things. So here, the foundation of operational excellence, risk management, and a resilient enterprise. We are interlinked now. So very mature companies, and there's a few companies out there that are doing this. It's as Greg says, it's a journey. You're probably talking 5 to 8 years into the journey of a concerted effort now. Now sustainability, this is the true end commitment here is companies at this stage, from an organizational infrastructure through the corporate frameworks such as enterprise risk management, governance, risk and compliance, GRC, and ISO risk standards. So these are the things that building that infrastructure so that you can gain a sustainable enterprise in risk management. So you're going to solidify this risk adjusted culture that includes risk considerations during decision making. And then leaders are continually assessing the risk profile and regularly evaluating risk appetite and leverage risk knowledge database to update supply chain risk, your portfolio. So for this stage, leaders recognize that each stage in this journey corresponds in several years in a continuous effort. So this is a journey, as Greg said in the beginning. It's a commitment from the leadership. It's a long-term commitment from the board. It's not something you get to by happenstance. But it does pay off in the resiliency, especially in this VUCA world that we've been talking about throughout. So what have we heard from our case studies and testimonials where we have applied the maturity model and the operational propensity and risk appetite surveys? Again, it's one survey, about 100 questions. In the CPG area, it was very interesting. The gentleman said, we agree with the persona. It's amazing how this aligns to where we were on our journey. And quite frankly, we thought they were somewhere else. And when they took the survey, we were like, wow, they're at a different place than we thought. And probably a lot of people thought. And he said, no, that's exactly where we were at. So that was a very interesting discussion. In the electronics area, the company there said, we agree with the persona. This has helped us create a centralized repository for supply chain risk management, a single point of truth. They were really pumped and got them on track of what they needed to be doing. In the chemicals area, Greg's going to be talking about that one in a few minutes, so I'll hold off on that. In the high tech area, it verified the progress of clear guidance and value-added next steps. So, again, we're pretty confident in the survey. We've had very good results. 30 minutes of leadership's time to provide an AOP plan that we called out in our last session is a pretty good way to setting up 2023 and getting your company set up for supply chain risk and resiliency. With that, just give you a little bit of insights on the maturity model of a case study of positioning it in within the supply chain risk and resiliency maturity model. You know, the first bullet here is, why do we believe that your position at this stage? We'll give you some insightful characteristic traits of your company, the governance structure, process challenges, the KPI and KRIs that you need to be looking at, and technologies to support your journey. And then we'll get into agility and resiliency by industry. So our maturity model will help you provide those insightful characteristic traits, and we look forward to supporting you in your efforts. So next, Greg will bring us through an actual use case here. Greg?
Yeah, sure. We thought we'd share 2 use cases, user feedback, talk about the maturity model. One is chemicals. And as you can see, what we do, the algorithms essentially take the survey respondent data and computer generate an as is and a to be. The as is the red icon. The to be is the black icon. So for this chemical organization, we position the algorithms positioned their as is and to be, because we asked 2 different questions. What do you feel like now? What would you like to be when you grow up? All right. And so here's a couple of threads that came from the chemical users. We've been focused on supply chain risk management for the past 3 to 4 years. We're still at the beginning of the visibility stage. They agreed with us in terms of the persona. We are a global company and we're spanning 160 countries. So pretty large landscape when it comes to supply chain risk. We're a global company with a single instance ERP. Good for you. That's a great start. And we're not looking past the visibility stage at the moment. As you can see, they wanted to get to the end of visibility. And as we said, this is a journey. You don't do it in a day or a week. It's months and perhaps a year or 2. So they were what we would call pretty conservative. There's no right or wrong answer in this discussion of risk. It's different. So that's where they were positioned. They were very pleased to see that. They agreed with it, and we would call them conservative. Next use case. Heavy industry. Again, same basic graph. They went through the analysis as Jim profiled for you, the journey. Their as is and to be, you can take a look at it. The as is red. They were kind of in the middle of the visibility stage, and they had a very aggressive, very proactive to be state. They want to be up there in sustainability. You know, bless them. All right. Very, very proactive and aggressive. Here's what they said. We've been focused on SCRM for 2 years. We're still at visibility. They agree. They were a little bit farther than the chemical folks. We're a global company, 150 countries, pretty big again in terms of landscape. We're a large global company, again, with a single SAP instance, not surprising. We're looking to achieve sustainability, which is their to be state, because they understand the definitions. They got the report. They read the report. In the report, you get the terms and definitions of each one of the stages, and they chose to put a to be state out there as soon as they are able. So we would call this organization opportunistic. All right, there's no right or wrong answer, but 2 different complexions about supply chain risk and resiliency. So with that, we have a
Just
couple
1 second,
wrap-up
Greg.
slides.
We had a
Yeah,
good,
you bet.
there's a good question in there. I answered it in
Okay.
chat, but I think it's worth talking about. And
Sure.
they said, do you put a time frame in the to be question? And I said, no, we do not put a time frame. We let them define the time frame that meets what they expect, because we found that by doing that, it breeded the dialogue of what do you expect. So the difference between these 2 in my opinion, and Greg could differ from me, but in these two use cases is one, you had a leader, a CEO in this case, who was gung-ho about supply chain risk and resiliency, new CEO, and wants to do a lot in this area. In the other company, I don't believe the CEO was leading a charge in supply chain risk and resiliency. That may have something to do with the 2B state being further out for this company versus the other. But there could be other things. But again, there's no right or wrong. The whole idea is that it breeds the conversation with the company and understanding where their mindset is. Greg, your thoughts?
You bet. No, that's absolutely correct. Again, risk is a matter of perspective, folks. I give you a real quick insight here before we move on. What we have found in 12 years, all right, is people have different perspectives on the same risk that we identify. Why? For only two reasons. One, what is their risk experience in their career, good, bad, or indifferent? And second, where that person resides in the organization, either in a department or hierarchical in terms of executive, director, management. There's only two drivers, all right? There's no right or wrong answer. But essentially, that's what we see. And therefore, you can get divergence like this when it comes to asking those questions of where would you like to be? So just a little quick insight on risk. Mm-hmm. All right, we said we would probably do a recap here. Jim went through it. You can take a look. This is the process, all right? And again, what do you get? Where are you? Who are you? How do you operate? Which we effectively or affectionately call it, what is the shape of your culture kite? And then we give you 5 to 8 action items. And the action items are not the same. We've developed hundreds of personas with combinations, permutations based on where you are, who you are, and how you operate. So every 90-day action plan is a little bit different based on the 3 elements that you see, the 3 charts. And then you got your process where we ask for a lead, a lead person, then we provide the report, and then we go through a checkpoint calls to kind of lead, guide, direct, and coach, and assist the company in achieving those 5 to 8 action items to do what? Get them moving forward on a supply chain risk and resiliency journey. We have more. All right, we said we would finish up by talking about tapping your risk experience, tailored company personas. Let's take a look at what we mean by that. Here is the ask. This is what we ask of your executives. Maybe 5 to 8 executives from your company fill out the 90 questions. As Jim mentioned, takes about 30 minutes if you go from beginning to end. We also ask this: could the executives who fill out the survey be department heads from different disciplines? Jim mentioned the procurement, logistics, ops, supply chain, manufacturing. We try to get as many different viewpoints on risk that we can. We like the variability, all right? We can harmonize that. We ask for different perspectives, all right? And then finally, our ask is, could the executives be from the same division or a product line? We talk about start small, all right? So take a product line, 10 stock keeping units, not a division, maybe a product line or a set of product lines. Keep it small, keep it simple, and then have those folks who touch that product line fill in the survey. That's pretty much the ask. What's the get? Well, we'll just finish off again. You get a sense of where you are as that product line in your supply chain risk and in our supply chain risk and resiliency maturity model. All right. You get a sense of who you are relative to your risk appetite. Very, very important. You need to understand what your company's risk appetite is before you move forward. You also then get a sense of how you operate. We talked about that. We call it operational propensity. It's really your culture. All right. We call it the culture kite. All right. So you get those three graphs as well. And then you get a 90-day action plan to move you forward based on the answers to those three sets of questions. And there's more. All right. You'll learn how to identify, assess, mitigate, and manage, because in the report, it's McKinsey-like. It's not 2 pages. It's pretty detailed. We give you a lot of insights, as Jim mentioned. And then there's a bonus. If you do that, we think it's strategic advantage for you in the bottom line. We've heard that from many exemplars. But the bonus is if you bring 5 or more executives to the tool, the consortium will offer your company 1 free pass to our supply chain risk and resiliency online course. And that's a value of $1,400 US, including a certificate from the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. And we'll close it out here with the benefits of indoctrinating a supply chain risk and resiliency program. And there's a number of benefits for those companies that have embedded supply chain risk and resiliency into their work life, so to speak. So we'll kick it off with cost reduction. Insurance premiums reduction by 10%. And year over year, 10% through automated workflow, operational excellence, hyper automation, process automation, and optimization, according to Gartner. So these are proven numbers. These aren't made up numbers. These are coming from Gartner and McKinsey and alike. Second, from a cost avoidance perspective, the 17% improvement in effectiveness in risk detection and assessment of year over year, and then 7% higher than other competitors. So that's what it's worth to you. And then cost avoidance, a decrease of 10% over the competitors. So cost avoidance of 3% on revenue and financial losses over your competitors. The next is working capital. Cash is king. And in today's world, cash is even bigger than king, if you can get bigger than that. Because the working capital and your cash flow forecasting, you'll see a 13% increase in it, and free cash of 10 to 30% by implementing these best practices. So here, when you're entering into an economic slowdown, this is survivability here. Then we talk about the cash to cash conversion cycle. So the reduction of 10 to 20% is what you'll see there. And then you'll see your key supplier viability, that cost of that $1 to $3 million per year for change out of key suppliers, being proactive and not reactive to that. We're going to, as we hit the snap of the bullwhip, which we are right now at, we're going to see suppliers and customers going out of business. The question is, if you lose that demand now from that customer that you depend on, what's going to happen to your supplier base? Now you're going to institute a little bit of snap of the crack of the bullwhip on your supply chain, because you're going to be starting to lose customers and suppliers on both ends. And this is a pretty important stage of the recovery that we're going through. So as Greg said, let's start small with the number of SKUs within a division. Think big, start small, and act fast. And with that, Greg?
You bet. We just wanted to kind of put a bow on our discussion and talk again about the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium's offering. We're totally online. We provide online education. Supply chain readiness, that's a different assessment tool. We have other webinar series talk about that. We We will be talking about supply chain risk and resiliency action plan tool for the next 4 or 5 webinars. And Jim will identify the dates in a minute. We have platforms that do heavy lifting for you. And again, we consult and lead, guide, direct, and coach companies in journeys. So contact us with your questions. Let us know how you feel about the maturity model. If you have any questions, just ping us, either visit the website, my address, or Jim's email address, and just let us know how we can assist you going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim for a closeout.
Thanks, Greg. Again, our next webinar is on risk appetite. As Greg pointed out, this is a very interesting webinar on your readiness for supply chain risk and resiliency. Is your company ready to take it on? How do you manage risk? How do you make decisions? That is an outcome of the assessment. And then we'll get into operational propensity. As Greg said, your culture kite, how do you operate in December 6th? And then next year, we'll be getting into the action plan and then how to make supply chain risk and resiliency a priority in your company in February. So we look forward to seeing you at future webinars. We'll be sending those out as we go on. And with that, in closing remarks, I think that this is a very important topic, the maturity and moving your company through your maturity and understanding that this is a journey. This isn't something that you just start instantaneously. And then circling back to integrating this into your annual operating plan. We believe it's really important to ensure that you'll be able to do this to make a difference right away. So if you launch the survey now, it can help you build your 2023 planning for embedding supply chain risk and resiliency into your company. Greg, final comments?
You bet. Folks, with rising inflation and a distinct possibility of a downturn economy, we think it's more important than ever to understand your supply chain risk maturity, your risk appetite, and your operating culture to do what? Survive and thrive going beyond today. So with that, thanks a lot for attending and all the best in your journey.